Okay, we're recording on the microphone as well now. What I figure I'll do is I'll just lay out some general context for Pillars of Eternity. You don't need to know anything about the game or computer role playing games in general. You don't really need any knowledge at all about gaming to understand this space. I'll lay out the setting, some of the general plot and themes. We're going to explore some of the characters and some of the sort of questions or decisions you're faced with in the game. Um, I'm hopeful that some people will request the mic as well throughout. I don't know if we have anyone here who has played Pillars of Eternity or who plays computer games at all. Um, but I think computer role playing games are sort of, if not the highest art form, at least one of the most recent ones, and it's very unique. I've always enjoyed a certain style of computer game. It's usually called CRPG or computer role playing game. I think it is, at least for me, the highest art form in a lot of ways. It needs a meaningful story, it needs some character development, it involves some exploration, um, and it needs that sort of moment at the end where you can look back and see how far you've come as well and the decisions you've made and how you have learnt about the setting, kind of interacted with all the characters, and now you've reached some sort of conclusion that makes sense and sort of caps off the story for you in a way that's satisfying. I was when I was thinking about this space, this particular point of how to explain a computer role playing game also reminded me of Lord of the Rings, right? The book. And at the end, when they're supposed to cast the ring into the fires or whatnot, I think off the top of my head, the line is something like, "I'm happy you're here at the end of all things," right? To his companion Frodo, to Bilbo, and it's you kind of want that moment as well in a CRPG. It's like, I'm glad I reached the end of this. I understand the setting, the lore, the story, how it's progressed, and I can kind of look back and feel like I understand the way the story developed and changed, and it's satisfying. And I'm glad to have actually gotten through it all. I feel like it was a meaningful story. So there's something about CRPGs that captures the choices and consequences of like one of those old choose your own adventure books where you're sort of reading a book, and unlike something like Lord of the Rings, it'll actually say at the end of the page, do you hide in the bushes from the ring wraith, or do you try to continue on and get to the village before it catches you, I suppose, if you're Frodo. But it has that element to it. It has a lot of character development, so you see how Frodo and whoever grow throughout the story. You kind of have that for your own characters in these games, but you also have that satisfying ending as well that gives you a sort of a sense of change or nostalgia, where the characters at the end are a lot different than the ones at the beginning, and you can kind of look back and sort of touching in a way, or has a complex story. So that sort of choices and consequences gameplay, that character development, and that meaningful or substantial story. And they involve a lot of reading. These games involve a lot of reading. I don't know how many words are in Pillars of Eternity, but it's more words than, say, the Iliad or something. There's a ton of text. Now we can get into some of the downsides of these video games. Often they're too long. They have too many words. In my opinion, they're not respectful of your time. And actually, I wouldn't recommend someone who is not already familiar with the setting, or who just naturally enjoys these games. I wouldn't recommend them playing, like buying Pillars of Eternity and trying it themselves, especially not the original one. It just it there's just a lot of content, and the game is not that old. It's only a little less than 10 years old, but there's been developments in user interface and the like that have improved since then, especially with the sequel. And just for your first game, it's not going to be too respectful of your time. The delivery of the story is not done that well, although the setting is very rich and very interesting, and I enjoy it. The story itself is not delivered very well. The narrative doesn't flow very smoothly. So unless you have the time to explore it and really put some effort into it, the story can actually be less satisfying than I think it should have been. Which I think is going to be one of the values of this space, because I'm essentially distilling the setting and presenting it to you on a platter. So hopefully, actually, I'll save everyone a lot of time. You don't need to play the game unless you really want to. I'm going to tell you the setting, why it's meaningful, and if you do play it, you'll be able to go right into it without being confused by it. If my voice gives out, I had a cough a little bit ago, but somehow I lost my voice, but it's coming back, so hopefully it'll be clear. If you can't hear me or something, just put your hand up. And at any point, feel free to raise your hand, request the mic. I'll pass the mic out. Like I said, I have some notes because it's such a large game and such a lot of content here. But I highly recommend, if you have any familiarity with it, make your own comments, observations, or if you have any questions, just ask. I've played this in the sequel, and so I'm quite familiar with it now, and can probably answer any questions you have about it. The one other thing special about this is, I was saying these computer role-playing games are sort of the highest art form for myself. Growing up younger, I played some of these older style games that are similar to this, but also choose your own adventure books and the like. And so I've always appreciated this style of entertainment product or storytelling. And 2015 is when Pillars of Eternity came out. And for people who have been playing these games for a long time, so for me, for example, I've been playing computer role-playing games or computer games since the late 80s, right? Not like it takes up my whole day, but I play them. I've enjoyed them that long. And from about the mid-2000s, I would say, until the mid-2010s, there was just a drought of these sort of complex storytelling, reactive games. There was just this drought. And then 2015 is kind of when they started coming out again. And so if anyone is telling themselves, there's no good artwork anymore, there's no good storytelling anymore, there's no good entertainment anymore, it's all just Marvel versus whatever the thing Marvel fights with. I don't know, I don't read or watch those movies, but if that's got you down, since about 2015 when this game came out, and a couple of others came out at the same time, it's been kind of another golden age. We had a golden age of great computer role-playing game storytelling in the mid-90s. And I guess around 2000, and then it was just a drought and everything sucked except for a couple of games that I could kind of pick out for you, but they're very from smaller developers. But then 2015 was kind of back in business. So from my perspective, being someone who appreciates these sorts of storytelling and this sort of game, it's been a golden age since then for art. And people that I would talk to, 10, 15 years ago on internet forums, even myself, we made some of our own games, and it's just a very active community. Gaming itself as a whole is obviously a huge industry now, bigger than the movie industry, although many games are not what I would be interested in, but the storytelling has also, it's a big industry again, it's a golden age for it, and a lot of great titles. So it's been a really good last 10 years or so, 8 years or so for people who like this sort of stuff. Obviously, if you want to know the scale that goes into making something like Pillars of Eternity, Pillars of Eternity was made by a large company, Obsidian, but it's nowhere near the largest. But even so, it involved hundreds of people, big name developers and writers, millions of dollars. I was in production for a couple of years. And the people that were working on it were linked to games that were from that prior golden age that I was mentioning in the 90s and early 2000s. So you have, like everyone knows, Baldur's Gate. So you got people who worked on that. And obviously the game is very clearly inspired by the works from the previous golden age, with Baldur's Gate, obviously, and the like. So, it is a major production with hundreds of people, millions of dollars, years of production, and a lot of big names from this area of, I guess, entertainment industry. But it's not just inspired and resembling stuff like Baldur's Gate from the past, but it's also clearly drawing from history and mythology. So as I present the setting, you're going to recognize, or you're going to think it resembles sort of the Olympian gods, sort of like a Homeric world in some ways. But it's also going to resemble, well, the Pacific Northwest with colonial people and native people. It's going to remind you of the Renaissance, like the Italian Venice and the like, these sort of trading, I don't call it company, but trading power, naval powers. And also the architecture and everything in the game is going to remind you a lot of various European periods and cultures. So you can see they drew from a lot of different sources of inspiration, and it's quite a beautiful game. You can look at the top there. Like I said, they put the tweets back to front when I put them in the space, but not the first one, but the second one there. You'll see there's the logo. Then you'll see a windmill in a village, and you're going to see, and you can see it's like a typical, it's like a stereotypical sort of stone construction of some sort of high medieval or late medieval, or maybe like a 15th century, like Renaissance sort of stone building with a windmill. And the city is like that as well, a lot of stone, a lot of familiar architecture. That other picture there with the wooden buildings and those long sloping rooftops and those, it'll seem very familiar to you. But like I said, ultimately it's a very flawed game in a lot of ways. So hopefully I can just preserve what was beautiful about it and save you a lot of time playing it. Before I get into it, in terms of what the setting was, the let's do this. I'm going to, if you go to the very last tweet I put up in the space there, I went and I found the introduction. And I'm just wondering if I should do it. Yeah, let's do it now. So I'm going to go play this introduction for you. And essentially, in all these games, you have to start somewhere, right? It's sort of, you have a character, you're playing the character, you're introducing it into this world and exploring this world. And so they give you a sort of a prologue where they say, at the beginning of the Iliad, what do they tell you? It's like a wrath, let's sing of Achilles, anger, etc. Here it just sort of introduces you into the story by, you're part of a caravan, you're coming to this new land, because essentially these colonial settlements need new people, fresh people in the Americas. It's not actually America, it's a fictional land, but it's kind of like putting out the cry for new settlers and people to come, and you're one of those people. And I think it sets the stage very well for what it feels like to start one of these games. So I'm going to just load that up for you. Here we go. And then if I can find it, here we go. I'll just play it. It's should be coming through now. And I will actually skip ahead to when it starts. And then it's about it's going to be about a minute of narrative, but I think it sets the stage for the setting very well. And somehow, oh, you're kidding me. You know, hold on, it's here.
5 wagons grope blindly for the path on a starless night, their master glancing ever upward to the skies for assurance that he is on the right course. A dim lantern his only protection against the encroaching darkness. But the skies bring no comfort, shining no light, betraying no hint of what they know. The caravan carries travelers bound for the frontier hamlet of Gilded Vale, you among them, where a local lord has offered land and wealth to settlers from abroad looking for a fresh start. You have taken suddenly ill, sweating and shivering, and one of the other travelers signals for the caravan master to stop on your behalf. He pulls up just in time to avoid plowing into the trunk of a fallen tree that bars the way ahead. You will go no further tonight.
So there you go. It's just sort of the introduction there, but it already gives you a sense of the game. It's not really going to be for those who have never played these sorts of games before, it's not like you're running around shooting and things. It's a lot of storytelling, nice music, and composition as far as I'm concerned. Um, and I pointed out how the Iliad begins with let's sing of the anger of Achilles. What are the opening lines here? If I load this up again, it's 5 wagons grope blindly for the path on a starless night, their master glancing ever upward to the skies for assurance that he is on the right course. So just kind of like you're just lost and trying to make your way to civilization. It's just a great way to start the story, I think, because you yourself are in a new land. The land you're actually going to, it's called Aora. So if you, again, I'm going to give you the setting and the theme and all of the things you'll need to really understand what's going on in it. There will be a lot of spoilers, so forgive me for that. But the land is called Aora. Like I said, it's basically the colonial Pacific Northwest, around the time of Renaissance Europe. So all the architecture you see, the fashion, it's all very Renaissance Europe. But there's, in this land where these small colonies are set up, there's also natives. So you got like a Native Americans essentially, with a bit of a Celtic flavor as well. Obviously, it's a fictional universe, so it's not like it's telling you it's a Pacific Northwest, or it's telling you that these people are Italian or these people are Northern European, but that's essentially what it is. European colonists with some Native Americans as well on the borders. It's very green, forested, rainy, a mountain range in the distance that you can go to later. So that's why I say it's very much like the Pacific Northwest. If you have been to Washington, it feels very much like, visually, it looks a lot like Washington in a lot of ways. But if you've played Baldur's Gate and others, it's going to remind you of that as well, maybe a little drearier. Um, we, in terms of the colony we're in, just like America had a whole bunch of colonies on the East Coast, there are a number of different colonies in this game. The one you're in, where you start, it essentially is one large walled stone city on the coast and a number of smaller villages surrounding it. Where that caravan is going to is actually one of those smaller villages. And then the colony immediately north of where you start is a less economically developed place. They don't have a major coastal city or anything. They're very much agricultural. Um, they, I don't want to call them like Eastern European or Russian. Imagine just a very pastoral agricultural people who are very devoutly religious. So a lot of fields and farms and just local churches, and they're very religious. And then there's a mountain range in the distance. Going back to that second last tweet there, you'll see the one up in the space. It has the ice there and the wooden buildings. There's a settlement up in the mountains as well. That's where that is. And it's essentially a very cold, hostile environment. But there's some ruins and things up there that people are interested in, so they've settled up there. And then far out to the east is the equivalent of Native Indians or Native Americans. So basically, it's European colonies in the Americas. But one of the interesting twists is, like I was saying, it's very much a Renaissance-style European theme. The major power, therefore, they're really Italian or Spanish. So the colony you're in is populated largely by what I would call Northern Europeans, but the actual people with the navy doing the trading and who have the money, they're all sort of Italian or Spanish, and they have a sort of a charming fake Italian or fake Spanish language that they'll throw in there. So they do play it up a bit. But it's interesting. So you essentially have the bulk of the populace in the colony being these not too wealthy Baldur's Gate style Anglos or Western Europeans. And then you have these trading companies or houses that are sort of Italian or Iberian, and they have very thick accents, and they kind of are very flashy with their money and the like, which is interesting. But technology wise, again, just expect anything you would in late medieval or early Renaissance. We're going to have old-fashioned firearms, cannons, but people are still wearing metal armor. We still have swords and pikes. A lot of the architecture is going to be stone and wood. You still have mills, just like we saw that windmill in that picture. You still have mills for grinding flour. There's some early signs of industrialization in the cities. So there's a theme of economic development and social change. But it's very easy to picture in your mind's eye, and it's very familiar as you play through it's not really going to be hard to adjust to. It's just going to feel natural to anyone who grew up in the Western world and has any sort of interest in medieval or Renaissance period. But what makes a setting unique, though? So all I've mentioned right now is really just American colonies, just with an unexpected number of Italians and Spanish people, and the time period's a little off. But actually, there's something very unique about this setting, which is it takes a specific position on the soul. So I'll make 2 points. Usually we'll debate something about the mind-body problem, right? So is there a soul and a body, and are they distinct? And the body is kind of like a robot or a vessel for the soul, and when the body dies, the soul is detached and goes somewhere else. Or is the soul some abstraction that comes about or emerges from a body? Or these sorts of debates that we will maybe have today. But it takes a very firm position that yes, there's a soul, yes, there's a body, they both exist. That's just how it is. The body is a vessel, and the soul lives in the body. And if death is essentially the body breaks down and the soul is released. And birth is essentially a body is conceived and a soul it's ensouled, at the time of conception or whatever. So essentially that exists. I see you crying there, Grey Matter, but actually you're going to like this because there's a little bit of I don't know if 2015 is when the New Atheists were still alive and kicking, but it's got a little bit of that atheist rage to it, I guess, in some ways. It goes a little over the top sometimes, but there is a bit of that in there. So atheism is one of the themes that's explored here. You'll be happy, Grey, although it doesn't always come out the way you want it to. But the other thing I want to say about the setting being firm on there being a soul is that that experiment that we sometimes talk about. I mean, I don't really talk about it these days, but I think we all thought it was amazing when we first heard about it. And that is, some scientists got together and they had a person die. They weighed the body before he died, and they weighed him after he died. And they apparently, again, I'm not the expert on this experiment, but they said the soul weighs 21 grams, because that's apparently the difference in weight from when the body before the person died and after he had died. And the result was, there's 21 grams difference, therefore the soul weighs 21 grams. Now, today people do not accept the results of that experiment and don't think that souls have mass or a material presence that can be weighed. But in this setting, just imagine if that were true, because we're saying, yes, souls exist. Yes, they connect to the body, and then they are released when the body breaks down. So actually, this sort of line of experimentation, in this setting, it's as if that was not necessarily that specific experiment being true. You wouldn't have to say the soul does have weight, but actually you can run experiments on them. You can observe them. And you could, in theory, weigh a body, and then when the soul leaves, there really has been a change, and maybe the body would weigh less. It's that sort of line of experimentation that is actually successful in this universe. And so people are actually able to study and run scientific experiments on the soul. So the body really is this dichotomy of body and soul. We have our ensouled world over here where the bodies have souls in them. Body degenerates and the soul departs. And then by doing these experiments, like how much a body weighs, and if we zap someone with electricity, can we make a dead body become ensouled or lose its soul, etc. By running these experiments, they can learn things about it. And so they learn that when the soul departs from the body, it goes essentially to the afterlife. So in this setting, because the soul can be directly observed and interacted with, they are actually able to answer questions about the afterlife. Now, no need to cry, Gray, because I haven't mentioned any gods being involved in this yet. But essentially, it puts the soul in the realm of science, which is a very interesting move. And I think a lot of people find that kind of fun and interesting because just like we found the experiment interesting when a guy dies, does the soul weigh 21 grams and the body lost that weight? It's sort of like, hey, you could actually directly interact with it. It opens up a lot of possibilities for storytelling. And so the soul goes to the afterlife, and essentially the way they handle it is not one of heaven or hell, but reincarnation. So obviously the body dies, the soul goes to the afterlife by crossing over to what they call the beyond. And then when there's a new person born, the soul will be brought back in to this side, it's attached to a body again. So there's that history of reincarnation, or that process of reincarnation. And of course it involves that process of going to the beyond, like when the person dies and the soul goes to the beyond. That process also involves losing memories. So I mentioned this game is clearly inspired by a lot of ancient mythology. Just think of the souls drinking from the river of forgetfulness before progressing into the other realm, right? So that's essentially what happens here. They don't actually drink from a river, but they do. They lose their memories. They shed the memories, ideally. So what do we like here? We all like Plato. So well, not all like him, but we've all read him. The last book of Plato, The Myth of right, to close out the book. He kind of tells a story of people drinking and losing their memory, and then on the other side they pick a new body and they're born again in that cycle of reincarnation. He obviously gets a reprieve or is exempt from it, but he explains a similar sort of process. But natural processes aren't perfect, right, in their execution. So even though we can describe a process of a person dying, the soul goes to the beyond, loses all its memories and comes back, that's nice. But like anything in reality, it's going to be imperfect when it's actually carried out. And just like that myth of or the person in Plato's text, people were choosing their own bodies, right? And they didn't always choose right. They didn't choose well. And sometimes they get a bad body that doesn't suit them. Something goes wrong. Or maybe they don't drink enough water that's going to make them forget. Like himself, he doesn't drink enough, right? If he drinks any. I don't have the book in front of me, but he doesn't lose his memory. And so they found that this process of reincarnation was not perfect. And it caused a lot of social troubles. And if we're looking into the history of the setting before you show up on the scene, what has happened is many, many, many generations prior to you, before your current civilization, before these colonies, they were essentially Atlanteans, or an ancient people. And they were part of the same cycle as you were. It's just thousands of years in the history of life, death, reincarnation. And they had their beliefs about gods and the like. And reincarnation was imperfect. People would be born into bodies that didn't suit their personality or ideals or whatever. And it was just causing a lot of social problems. And so they also had studied the soul, and they were trying to solve the problem to make sure that people had, a social status of birth that suited them, a body that suited them, made sure that when they died, the soul immediately went to the beyond, didn't hang around as a ghost because maybe it was killed in a war crime or something, was upset and confused. They were trying to figure out a better way to improve that natural process to make sure it ran how it ideally should run, instead of people being randomly thrown into bodies that maybe don't suit their personality. People not drinking enough, and so sometimes they would remember old memories and it would upset them. So they wanted to cure that, so they were studying on the soul, just like your character's generation is also doing. But again, this is more like the Atlanteans. I'm telling you the history. These ancient people also believed in gods, right? Just like the Olympians. They believed in, not Zeus and Hera, but they had their own beliefs. And think about what this would mean if we could experiment on souls. Because let's say we're a Christian or something. We believe, I shouldn't say because I'm not Christian, but a Christian might believe that God has a role in the afterlife, and God has a role in the development of a soul or creation of a soul, and loving the personality or the will of the soul, right? Um, but these people who, in this setting, were able to observe the soul and observe it go to the other side and then to come back, they weren't seeing any influence of any gods. They weren't. They couldn't find a god on the other side. They weren't observing any of that in their experiments, and so essentially they were like, "Shit, we have this imperfect natural process of reincarnation that's causing an imperfect sort of cycle of life that we think we can improve as people. Maybe they cannot improve it. Maybe they messed it up. We'll see. But they thought they could. It was causing them problems, and so they were experimenting into it. And they also had religious beliefs about the afterlife and being your soul being guided to the afterlife, just like even ancient Egyptians or something would have the Book of Dead, where they have poems or stories about how to go to the afterlife and how the gods will judge you and whatnot. They had these stories, but they weren't. Their experiments weren't turning anything up on the other side, and so they were concluding, hey, our science has really disproven at least part of our religious mythology. Um, so it doesn't appear to be any gods, and we've been worshipping them, and they're meaningful to us. So what the hell's going on, right? And so what they do is these Atlanteans, they're not called Atlanteans, but they're essentially, just like Plato said, a long, long time ago, there was this advanced race of Atlanteans. Not those exact words, obviously, but that sort of spirit is here as well. And so what they said was, we've done enough science on how souls leave the body, go to the beyond, and come back to create some machinery to help automate that process. So if a person dies, they are automatically sent to the other side. And when they want to come back, they are sent to an appropriate body to help automate that. So we don't need to understand the technology, but you see in this setting, the soul is something that can be observed. You can run experiments, you can collect data, and you can figure out how to channel it in certain directions or affect it. And so they were able to come up with a way of standardizing or improving the process of reincarnation. Just like a farmer, for example, maybe digs channels and can redirect the water so that the fields have water, and he doesn't have to carry buckets of water to the fields. He's got like a canal or something to take it there automatically. And so they were able to direct the souls along certain pathways, make sure that where children are born, there's a soul immediately ready to take hold in that body, etc. And what they also did was, obviously, as ensouled people, they're on this side, right? The machinery is affecting things on the other side. And that's really what their old religious mythology was about. There were supposed to be gods on the other side, just like for ancient Egyptians, there'd be a god on the other side to weigh your soul and see how you'd been and give you your reward. Or in the myth of in Plato, there's supposed to be the river you drink from, and then you get offered some bodies after you're judged, and you pick a body. There's supposed to be something there. But the gods were all absent. And so what these ancient people did was, using their technology, they essentially achieved a godhood or apotheosis, right? They, in order to run and maintain this machinery they constructed, or this system they constructed to improve the process of reincarnation, they essentially sacrificed themselves and kept themselves permanently on the other side, in a sense, as people who could serve that religious function. The judge that will weigh the soul, the gods who will offer the bodies for the people to pick for the next life. They couldn't find those people, and so they became them. And so a long time ago, these Atlanteans, not only did they create this machinery to standardize the reincarnation process to ensure that it worked well, and could avoid problems like, there's no souls ready to join a body, so that child will be born without a soul and just die young. They didn't want that happening. So they standardized it and, you could say tampered or interfered with it, but they tried to improve it. And then they also, because they couldn't find any gods on the other side to maintain it or to carry out these functions, they essentially developed the technology to combine their souls. They committed essentially mass suicide or sacrifice and became the gods on the other side. And so your character is being born into this sort of colonial Pacific Northwest world of Renaissance era technology that also has Olympian style gods that are worshipped, and that's their origin. They are really the amalgamation or the apotheosis of an older civilization of Atlanteans. And just like they came from people who are flawed, they themselves are flawed. Um, and just like Olympian gods, they're very interested in us still. Um, from their perspective, when they achieved apotheosis, we would have been like barbarians or cave dwellers or natives in the forest or something. We weren't quite there. But obviously, they have been interested in us, and they kind of maybe view what they did as us receiving the benefits of that. And so, and also just like the Olympian gods, they have their own internal feuds because they became these amalgamations of souls. There's several of them, and so they bicker amongst themselves, and we wind up getting involved in their bickering. So what you wind up is this very interesting Homeric pseudo-Olympian god setting of their plotting and how we get caught up in it, but in a colonial Pacific Northwest with Renaissance technology. And putting aside any flaws of how the story is delivered, how the game plays, it's a very interesting setting that clearly a lot of work went into it. And there's a lot of content to go through. And it does a good job of exploring a lot of questions that interest us today, but in this particular setting. So there's essentially two things I want to do in the space, other than that general exposition of the context and general setting and history. I want to go back to the player character, you yourself in this game, and what's going on at the time that you showed up. Because when you are in that caravan and you're going through the mountain trail to one of these colonial villages, because there's opportunities there for work and they need more settlers. Obviously, the caravan, you were ill, they stopped. It's a storm or they can't figure out where they're going in the night, so they stop. You wind up exploring that local area, trying to find some medicine because you're unwell, right? So you want some roots or berries or whatever. And you wind up observing some sort of cult or ritual practices, and you wind up getting involved in some of those Olympian god disputes. And that's really the how you get sucked into the meat of the game, or to the Olympian style plot. But there's two significant plot threads that I want to tell you about that are going on right as you join. And after I do that, what I want to do is I want to introduce two of the Olympian gods themselves. I'll call them Olympian, even though obviously they're not ancient Greek, but they're that style. I want to introduce two of them, and I'll introduce to you a scenario, one for each of them, and sort of that sort of choice and consequence or reactive storytelling is opportunity to say, what would you do in this situation, or what's a right or moral thing to do given this situation. Which is a big part of why these games are enjoyable and why I would call them sort of an art form. It's telling you a story, and it's also a unique art form because it's giving you a chance to give your input or to react to it. And it kind of, your input or reaction will change how the story goes in limited ways. It's one of the beauties of this new art form that we have. So essentially, I told you the ancient history, right? So you understand the bit about the Atlanteans, how the gods came to be, and what the setting is. There are essentially two threads that you have to immediately deal with, that you learn about in the story. One is, of these Olympian gods, there was supposed to be a king of the gods, like Zeus, right? So these Atlanteans committed mass suicide, they're apotheosis, they form these gods on the other sides, and they had intended for one god to be king. just like in Olympian gods, Zeus is king. But think about it. Why is Zeus the king? He has brothers. He's not the oldest. I guess he was the one that freed them from their father, but only because their mother hid him, right? And the Coretis like bang their drums or whatever and dance so that his father wouldn't notice him. And the other brothers were swallowed up, but they had no say in that. It was just a factor circumstance, I guess. So why is Zeus the king? I don't get it sometimes. Not the oldest brother, and it's not like he was the only one that could have defeated his father by his own virtue. It's just luck of the draw in a sense. Being the youngest, he was the one that got hidden. But at any rate, they intended for one of the gods to be the queen of the gods. But actually, on the other side, when they achieved apotheosis, all the gods were like, you know what? No, we're not going to accept Zeus. It's like Poseidon in Hades. You're turning around and saying, nah, you know what? Zeus, you're like us. You're just a brother like us. And we're going to have an oligarchy. And that's what these gods do. They essentially reject the god or goddess that was supposed to be the queen of the gods. And they just deny her what she thinks that she deserves and what was her intended position. And it's tied into the ancient character or the ancient culture because these Atlanteans lived in city-states, essentially, like tyrant-run city-states. And so they're very independent people, these independent political powers. And so the gods on the other side also had that sense of independence and pride. And they didn't want to sort of bend the knee to one head god or hegemon. So they didn't. So part of the plot is that queen of the god, who was denied, the name is Woedica, she wants to take that position that belongs to her as sort of her birthright. And then the other god's trying to stop her. And part of the debate that gets tied up in that is, why do the gods want to stop her and why does she want that power? And the question that comes up is a leader or the person who gives the law or gives the guidance or leadership subject to leadership or law? Is a tyrant subject to the law if the tyrant is the one responsible for giving and enforcing law? Like, how can a judge be judged when there's no one above them? And indeed, if there's no one even to the side of them, if they're a king. So it's an interesting question, and part of the reason why Woedica wants to be that Zeus-like figure is it was promised to her, yes, but also she has a drive to be the leader and to make the decision and to do whatever is necessary to preserve this sort of machinery of reincarnation and this system of godhood that they've created. And to do that, she feels that you can't be subject to the law. You can't be a slave to the law because the law is not a leader. The law doesn't make decisions when new problems arise. Again, hearkening to Plato, what does Plato say in his laws? You know, the word on the page is, or in a number of texts actually, you know, the word on the page is only going to go so far. The rule is only going to be so relevant to a given situation. And so for Woedica, she's saying, not only was I destined to be the queen of the gods, but you need a queen of the gods if the system is to be preserved or to go forward indefinitely, because a system or a set of rules is not as valuable as a leader who can react to immediate circumstances in a very specific way and can do things beyond the law or act in an extrajudicial fashion. It's like, what if you have a serial killer who's just really good at hiding the evidence? Okay, can we ever catch that guy? Can we ever convict him beyond a reasonable doubt? That's a big challenge. But what if you just know it's him and you go shoot him in the back of the head? There's the end of your serial killing problem, right? But it was an extrajudicial act, but it's a lot more efficient, and it did go and succeed in a way that the law could not. Now, I'm not saying we all need to be committing extrajudicial killings, but that's the sort of argument there. She thinks there needs to be that leader who can go above the law, commit extrajudicial acts in order to secure the system and to give everyone some sort of project or mission to work towards. Whereas the other gods are thinking, if there's one of us who is above the law and in charge of setting policy or what our goals are, we're kind of like slaves to that person. Um, and we are bound in chains of whatever the law says you can and can't do, whereas they, by privilege of their position, are not. And so, of course, they don't want that. So, what you find, and this is actually Pillars of Eternity has a very mature, very kind of tragic and almost upsetting. It is like a very dark plot line in a lot of ways. Wodika has decided that she's going to take the power that was promised for her. And the other gods are trying to figure out ways to stop her, right? And so what she plans to do is, conspiring with mortals, just like Olympian gods always do, she conspires with mortals to activate some machinery or to construct some machinery to trap souls of people that die in a certain region, which of course happens to be the region that you are trying to go and join a settlement in. And so when people die, the soul is not going to the wheel or that reincarnation process on the other side. They call it the wheel, which is that technology or that regulated process that old civilization created and now is maintaining, the wheel. They're not going to the wheel. The soul is leaving the body, and then it's just being held in a container or in stasis, because a soul has a certain dynamism or energy, right? I mean, again, what is a soul for the ancient Greeks if not some principle of motion or energy? And so she's storing up these souls. She's having these mortals work on these machines and trap souls and hold them in stasis so that she can then use them to empower herself above the other gods. And the other gods, they're not always... They do kind of know what she's doing. They figure it out eventually, but they don't immediately know, obviously. And so one of them, the god Aethys, who represents things like rebirth, the dawn, the light. He's kind of like a good god. He conspires with people as well. And I mentioned there was that very agricultural, pastoral people who are very religious. Aethys essentially conspires with them, and he picks a leader from them to serve as his avatar, and basically goes on a holy war to invade all the nearby settlements, including the one you were going to, and essentially root out the people that Wodika was conspiring with, and to break all these machines, and to stop whatever she was trying to do. But he failed. He was actually blown to bits, because, long story short, they killed him. The other gods conspired against him with other cities. The war was going on, and he winds up getting killed. Now, that brings us to a very interesting point, because just keep this in mind. There's been a very large war that ended with the death of a person claiming to be the avatar or to be possessed by a god, and he's been killed. That's just happened as you arrive. It's like a few months ago or a year ago. And the other thing is, remember, the souls of people that are dying are being held in stasis. They're not going back to the wheel. And so what we're going to learn is something, and this is why I say it's a very dark setting. When new people are born, we're going to visit what happens if there's no soul to give them. So there's going to be a lot about childbirth and miscarriages and child loss, because there's no souls for them. And the people don't know what to make of it. So we'll revisit that very shortly, but just keep that in mind. Because the other plot thread you're going to encounter here is that these Olympian gods, they're proud, right? They don't want people to know their origin story. They don't want people to know where they came from. Obviously, they're real. So they're not. It's not like they're not real or they're weak or they can't do what they say they can do. They can. But they're not really gods. They were people like you and I, just like Atlanteans were people like the Athenians, right? But they just became something more. And they don't want people to know about that, or most of them don't want people to know about that. So they try and hide that, and they try to conspire with people and governments to stop people from researching souls. Like, don't conduct experiments where you weigh a guy before he dies, then when he dies, weigh him again and see the weight of the soul, or prod him with electricity to see if you can bring a dead body back to life. Like, don't do that, because they don't want people going down that road, because they want the people just to worship them, to accept the wheel and this regulated system of reincarnation, and not doubt them. And so that's the other threat as well. So the people that are conspiring to make Wodica the queen of the gods by giving her these souls held in stasis are also trying to help the gods hide their secret from the common people, and to push government policies that say don't research into this. Actually, this is, if people do want to play this game, it's the best part of it. Is on this plot line of how the gods were trying to hide their origin from people. It's called the White March. If you play part 2 of the White March, they present a story that's sort of like the Thessalian witches. So if you read ancient Greek works, the witches in Thessaly are very famous. Even Roman works. The Golden Ass, I believe, is in Thessaly, is where the Roman noble is traveling when he gets in trouble and gets turned into a donkey. But the Thessalian witches were said to be able to bring the moon down and crash it into the earth, right? So the gods actually wanted to bring the moon down and crash it into the earth to set human civilization back a long time. And the goddess that was ahead of that plan was one who embodied the desire to forget or not be haunted by the past. So she wanted people to forget. And it's kind of touching because her lover was the god who embodied the desire for progress and that human desire to be remembered. And so he opposes it. So the White March Part 2 is actually very well written, sort of a romance or sort of a touching story. Again, a lot of it reminds me of various Greek myths, but very touching story between a goddess who wanted everyone to forget and the god that represented that desire to be remembered and to leave a legacy. And, one of them passes away, in a sense, and sort of a sad story. It's kind of like, I don't know if you guys know the story of Epimetheus and Prometheus, right? So Prometheus loved the humans, and he wanted to do well by us, give us fire and the like. The other gods were angry with him and also wanted to take their anger out on us. And Prometheus tells his brother Epimetheus, don't accept any gifts from the gods. It's not going to work out well. And Epimetheus, who is the god of afterthought, whereas Prometheus is a god of forethought, Epimetheus is like, yeah, sure, bro, I'll never take a gift from those Olympians. They won't trick me. Epimetheus and Prometheus being titans, of course. But being the afterthought guy is forgetful and doesn't realize things until it's too late. He accepts a gift, and it's Pandora, right? And so humans get screwed. And in another sense, for other reasons, Prometheus also gets screwed and chained up. And so there you have the god of forgetfulness or afterthought, and he is in a relationship with the god of forethought or knowing things ahead of time. Not a direct comparison, but I feel there could have been some inspiration there, and Epimetheus acts in a way that ruins what Prometheus had hoped about, because Epimetheus brings all these sorrows to humans by opening up the jar or whatnot and letting Pandora's troubles out. But also it's an interesting contrast with what we find in the Iliad. Of course, we have Aphrodite and Hephaestus, right? And Ares gets in the mix there. It's kind of a funny, in a sense, romance between, I guess, 3 of them, and how Ares and Aphrodite get caught. Whereas in this setting, again, Olympian-style gods, but it's a more serious sort of tone, more somewhat depressing. I mean, it's a sadder story, more serious rather than comedic. But again, it's very much in this sort of Homeric tradition, and it's very well done. If you did want to play this game, I would say the only one you should play is White March Part 2. But anyway, there you go. You basically you arrive on scene during a conspiracy to ban the study of souls, so the origin of the gods is not released, and right after a holy war, um, and now God is siphoning souls away from the reincarnation cycle to fuel her own coup to become like Zeus. And I wanted you to remember that the souls are being siphoned away because that's really what makes it such a tragic storyline. I mean, religious war aside, it is what it is. I mean, games always have people fighting. But in this one, because the souls are being taken out of the cycle and being stored away, newborns are being delivered without souls. So you have parents, as you walk around and talk to people, you have these parents who are having children, but the children just lack any interest in life. And so the parents exhaust themselves trying to feed them, watch them 24/7, and the children just die. It's kind of got a Black Plague sort of vibe to it. I hate to use the word vibe there, but it's that sense of just hopelessness and disease or a plague where, one of the blessings with COVID was, when COVID broke out in 2020, was we were told early on that kids weren't really affected, right? I was like, kids don't get sick. At which point I was thinking, who gives a shit then? I mean, if kids don't get sick, it can't be that big of a deal. Obviously, people thought COVID was a huge deal. I'm not going to discuss COVID. But I thought it was a major, significant factor in how one should think about it that children were not affected by it. Here we have a setting where actually the children are the ones being affected by this basic Olympian conspiracy. And of course, that then in turn affects the parents and affects the rest of society. And so much of the game explores that. It explores a sort of a Black Plague era time or scenario, but only children are targeted, and how that affects people. And so you have people in this Renaissance era. Some of them are trying to pray to the gods. Some of them will say it's happening because in the Holy War we killed that guy who claimed to be the god of rebirth. Some will say, try to seek herbal medicine or remedies from the Native Americans. And some, of course, are studying souls and are looking into that. And ultimately, when you follow that thread, you learn that it's really tied up in that sort of Olympian conspiracy. But throughout, it's a very dark theme. I think it's very rare to have a game or any sort of literature go down such a dark route and really explore this question of conceiving children, wanting them to be healthy, but knowing that likely the children will not be healthy, at least not in this region. You have people fleeing the region when they get married and maybe they want to leave to go back to Europe or go to a more distant colony to get away from the scene of this where the war happened and where the children are not being born. But it's a very rare theme to really make one of the main plot lines in your game or in your book or in your story be a plague that kills newborn babies. Like it's rather dark, and they do explore it at length. I mentioned people will be interested in, for example, the Renaissance style or early industrial style experiments on the human soul, because as part of it, just like we might see plague doctors or native doctors try to come up with concoctions to heal people, these people who are studying souls are also trying to heal them. And so just like in the early industrial era, we we see some experiments that maybe we would consider inhumane today or not appropriate today. These people try to do things like take the soul of an animal, like a pig or a deer, and implant it into a child. Which, kind of works, but not really. It just makes the child, it has an interest in staying alive and, breathing and walking and eating, but it doesn't develop into an actual person. It doesn't learn to speak. It just prolongs the anguish of the parent. It's like a partial cure. It's like here's this baby who was born in a way that they cannot develop into an adult. Here are some scientists or medical doctors who say, "Hey, let me run this experiment. I can maybe bring your child a soul, or like make them. I can allow them to grow up using this technology." The parent, of course, desperate, will allow that to happen. And really, all they've done is they prolonged their pain for a few more years as a child grows, but does not develop language skills and does not develop a human, a full human personality, because of course it doesn't have a human soul. So it's just a disaster. And it's not that every child is being born sick. I mean, some souls are still coming back and being reincarnated. But because the bulk of them are being trapped for purposes of Lodica, there's a lack of souls. So most children, there's not enough souls to go around in this region, so to speak. And so again, they explore it at length, and I think it's interesting, it's unique, but it's a very dark setting. Yeah, but that's essentially where you land. I mean, you come in right at that moment where there's a plague on newborns. There's been a war that's just ended, and a very dark setting. And you wind up seeing some cult activity, and you follow the thread and figure out that actually all this is coming about due to the Olympian gods, and you try to resolve it. And actually, you do at the end. At the very end of the game, again, this is an old game, it's 8 years old, and so I'm spoiling it because I wouldn't even recommend you play the whole thing, just given how long it is and the interface and some other issues I had when I played it. But in the end, actually, you come before all the gods and you decide what to do with those souls that have been held in stasis. And so you can give them all to Wodica, and she'll use them to become like Zeus, and then you'll have a proper Olympian hierarchy, right? Zeus and all the Olympians, and I guess there must be some lesser monsters or whatever, like Titans. But or you can try to give the souls back to the children who have been most recently born, although kind of a haphazard thing, and children have already died, so there's, it's not perfect. You can't really solve all the problems. Or you can just call it a wash and consign the souls to oblivion, sort of annihilation, which is not necessarily the worst possibility, but that's, you got to make that decision at the end of the game. What do you do with those souls? But I think that really achieves one of the two things I wanted to do here, which is tell you exactly not just the setting, but exactly how the world is when you show up and what the major challenges are there. And what I also want to do is introduce you to two of the gods and the scenarios that they're involved in, which are going to tie into that question about those Olympian conspiracies and how they've affected people. We'll start with Skane. So if you go to the second tweet I have up in the chat there, you'll see there's a picture. It looks like a man who has his nose cut off and he's got scars on his arms and face, or it looks like he's been whipped, and a lady standing next to him, and then a little man down below. Now, this is actually a picture from the sequel, which is a game I do recommend everyone plays. It's very well made. But Skane is going to be that first person on the left. And he is sort of the god of seething. So, I mean, it's not... I mean, they do use the word seething in relation to him, but that's exactly what it is. He's seething. And just like the Olympian gods, like we may say Aphrodite is beauty, and Apollo is the light, and Zeus has lightning or whatever, and Poseidon's out in the water. All these gods have their own, I guess, what they represent, or their particular personality trait, or what really defines them. And like the Olympians, they're often an abstraction of a given emotion or a principle. And so Skane is on the left there. Next to him, that's Wodica, which is interesting. I'll comment on that shortly. But and then down below you see yourself. You can just ignore that. But Skane is essentially the god of quiet seething. It's like that internal just desire to get back at someone. who has beaten you in some way, or is keeping you in check, or is holding you back. It's like you're seething, you're really mad about something, but you can't do anything. You're powerless to stop it. It's like if you're locked up in a prison, um, how can you get out? I mean, you're locked in a dungeon or something, right? You don't have a key, you can't get out. You're just seething about the guy that got you and locked you down here. But you can't. It's like, too bad, you lost. You're down there, you're powerless. Cope and seethe. So that's what Skane is. He's that sense of quiet, internal seething and conspiring or trying to come up with some sort of secret plan to get revenge or to hurt the person you're seething about. So obviously not what you would typically think a good god. But he's a sort of god that if you indulge in that emotion of seething or hate or anger or just like that desire for revenge and you pray to him, he's a sort of god that can help. I use help very loosely, but he can kind of help the underclass or help the powerless. He can sort of help the people that are seething and can't do something about it themselves. So if you're a galley slave rowing a boat, what can you do about it if you're chained to the oars? You could pray that the boat sinks and the owner drowns along with you. So if you're willing to suffer, if you're willing to keep seething and indulge in that pissed off attitude and do it quietly and just pray to Skane, then whoever's oppressing you or whoever's got one up on you, they can suffer too. It's sort of a nuclear option for the powerless, the nuclear option for losers. That's what Skane is. If you want a historical, I like this game in a lot of ways because it can be related back to antiquity. If you want a historical example, we've been talking about the Olympians, so let's take it back to ancient people. How many of you know the Kynedon conspiracy in Sparta? Right? Around the 4th century, early 4th century, there was a man called Kynedon. You'll find him in Xenophon's Hellenica. He was a Spartan, but a subclass, so he wasn't a full citizen. And he was seething about not being a full citizen. He couldn't stand it that there was a class of Spartans, the equals, that was above him. And he was a second-class citizen, basically, or a third-class citizen. And there's nothing he could do about it. And even though he was a privileged second or third-class citizen, he was still inferior to the full citizen. And he just couldn't hack it. He was just seething. And so he made a secret plot to overthrow the full Spartan citizens. And when he was caught, actually, the quote from him is preserved because the Spartan authorities, they tortured him, of course, to get his co-conspirators. But they asked him, why did you do it? Why did you betray the Spartan state and all of us? And he said he did so because he did not want to be inferior to anyone else in Lacedaemonia. He didn't want to be inferior to anyone else in Sparta. So that sense of seething internal anger that you can keep secret and you can have a conspiracy about it, that's what this god represents. That sort of that Kynedon conspiracy of seething about being a second-class Spartan. And there's another quote that comes from Kynedon, in Xenophon's Hellenica. When Kynedon was showing a person around a marketplace, he was pointing out all the people that were not Spartans. Or rather, actually, he was pointing out all the people that were Spartans. And they were greatly outnumbered by the other members that were at the marketplace. So full Spartan citizens were a minority at this marketplace. And he essentially told this person that he was trying to induct into the conspiracy that there's so few Spartans we can easily overpower them. And all the other people you see that are not Spartan citizens, they're all seething just like Kynedon. And they want to eat their enemies raw. That's the actual quote that Kynedon tells this person. He says, all these people, they want to eat the Spartans raw. And that's very much this god Skane. He's that internal seething and desire just to get revenge at any cost. And you don't have the power to do it yourself, so you need to secretly conspire or pray to a god to do it. So again, there he is in the picture there. I said, I pointed out to you how Woedica is there next to him. So remember, I told you that Woedica was that goddess who was promised to be like Zeus, to be the queen of the gods. And she's here with Skane because she's seething in a way, right? She was promised to be the head of the gods, and she's not. And she doesn't have the power to take it. So she's seething. And so it's sort of fitting that Skane is standing right next to her, because he is the god of seething, of secret conspiracies. And again, you can see he looks like he's been punished criminally. He's got his nose cut off and he's been whipped and stuff. So again, that's Skane. And one of the good things about this style of game is, again, it's a lot of reading, and they write a lot of books and texts that, if you are interested in the story, you can essentially go to a library and read a book in game. You go to the library in the game, find a book on the topic, and read it. And here we have a text that you can find about Skane, that is about a farmer who was essentially seething about a landlord and wanted revenge. And he wrote in his journal, it's called the last entry in his journal, to his son, and wanted to tell him that he was going to kill himself in order that the landlord would die. And again, in these games, I would say the writing is at times quite good. It's always, it's fitting with the theme, obviously, but it really develops the theme. And if there is some aspect of the story you like, it's great to be able to find more content on it, especially when it's well written or makes sense. And so I think this journal entry captures that sort of internal seething and willing to have yourself be destroyed if it means that the person you're really pissed off about is also destroyed. So this is what he writes. I'll read it. It's not that long. Again, this is a farmer writing to his son before he essentially does a ritual that will kill him but also kill his landlord. My son, tomorrow I become the effigy. Tomorrow I become Skane's embodiment on Aora. Tomorrow my master chokes on his own whip. For months we met by secret conclave to plot our landlord's demise, all the while working the fields as if our hearts were content. Skane teaches us to plot with the mind, or keeping one's face impassive, inscrutable. Fair fights are for those with armies. The quiet slave is our whetstone, our focus. In his worship, our cause finds focus, clarity, and possibility. Tomorrow, my master chokes on his own whip. By the time you read this, I will be dead. I pray Skane does not abandon me for speaking of my plotting, but a son deserves to know how his father died. For I have volunteered to be the effigy. Skane will inhabit my body, using this old farmer's simple flesh as a puppet of godly rage. I have been shaved and anointed. Tomorrow morning I will be your father in name only, as my manhood will be removed, my nose and ears removed, and my useless mortal eyes will be replaced with flint stones, through which Skane might see the world. My son, I am sorry for the lies I've told you these past few seasons, but Skane demands secrecy. Even your mother knows nothing of my furtive service to the quiet slave. Curse my name if you must, but never weep for me, for I die for the betterment of our community, to smite our Lord's corruption from the face of Aora. Tomorrow my master chokes on his own whip, for tomorrow I become the effigy. So that's essentially, as you can see, a farmer who's seething and wants to kill his landlord and is willing to sacrifice himself to do it. And, remember the saying from Heraclitus? It's, which is what I was reminded of when I was going over the text the other day. It's, it is difficult to fight Thumos for whatever it wishes, it buys at the price of Psyche. So if we play with the words a bit, maybe here it's, it is difficult to fight anger or difficult to fight seething. for whatever it wishes, it buys at the price of one's own life. And that, I think, really sums up Skane. It's like you seethe so much, fine, you can get what you want, but it will cost yourself. And that's what this god embodies. And that's how it affects the world. And I figured we could go through a scenario that does crop up, because it's going to illustrate the setting, those two plot lines, or at least one of those two plot lines that I just mentioned, and kind of gives you a sense of the ways that you can respond to the world, and how you can develop the story and express your own moral viewpoints in this sort of game. And also, it's ambiguous in what you ought to do. I'll tell you off the bat, for me, I think that if anyone is going to give in to a sort of nuclear tier seething like this, they should just be banished from society or executed. I mean, even if they were really mistreated, let's say the landlord really did like whip his slaves and beat them and was bad to them or whatever. That's horrible enough, but I still think that if someone is just going to go nuclear and essentially commit suicide and murder, like a murder-suicide, it's sort of, I probably gonna not approve of that, regardless of what happened to the person. So anyway, here's the scenario. You'll see in the last screenshot there in that tweet, that's what the game looks like as you play it. You can see your party there walking around a tavern, talking to someone. That person's name is Lord Hammond. And so while in the coastal city, again, remember there's a main coastal city and several villages. Oh, we got a request to speak. Who have we got here? Beamworthy. Beamworthy, feel free to speak. Yeah, Beamworthy, feel free to speak. I see you have the mic now.
Oh, okay. So just real quick, before we move along too much, I just think I wanted to mention that that's like why I think justice is important and having like the law and so forth. Because I mean that's what you'd have recourse to, as opposed to the whole going crazy thing.
Yeah, exactly. There needs to be some sort of moderation or standardization or justice. You can't just let people go carry out their own vendettas at will and essentially go nuclear and mass murder people because they were mistreated. Even if they were mistreated very badly, as we're going to see happened. But just to show you the degree to which these games can present ambiguous moral scenarios that kind of make you think, really make you pause and think as to what you should do. Here's one of them. I'll just go through it now. So like I was saying, in this setting, in the colonies, there's a coastal city, a major built-up city, and many villages around it. So when you go into the coastal city, obviously it's a game, so you talk to people and say hello and see if people need help. You're told that a nobleman's daughter has gone missing in one of the villages out in Deerford. The name of the village is Deerford. So apparently the nobleman was on holiday with his daughter, and she goes missing. So his family in the city, who had received a letter, of course, they hire you essentially to go and help. So, you want money and you want friends in high places, so you go there to Deerford. You go to the tavern or the inn, and you find Lord Hammond, who's there in that third picture. And he tells you he was taking his daughter on a trip so she could find a husband because she had just come of age. So they're traveling around. Obviously, they're traveling because they're leaving the area where people are having this sort of plague on newborns. He doesn't want his daughter to be married and have children in an area where there's this disease or plague that's essentially killing children. So he goes on this journey, on a vacation, a holiday, and also a trip to find a new husband. And he's there for a few days. His daughter is ill. She gets a cold or a cough or something, so they stay for a few days. And then one day she just disappears. She's not in the room when he gets back to it. So he's like, where's my daughter? And the locals aren't helping him. The locals really don't tell him much. So when you show up and you're like, hey, the people back in the city got your letter. They say the daughter's missing. Is there anything I can do to help? He says, yeah, go find her. The locals aren't helping, and I have no idea where she is. So, you can question him. This game, again, a lot of reading, a lot of ability to ask questions, walk around, meet people, investigate. And so you talk to him, you talk to some others, and the locals kind of mention that the daughter and the father weren't getting along very well. And that's why they don't want to help the father. They're like, he was kind of being, not outright abusive, but, or maybe outright abusive. They're kind of tight-lipped, but they're saying, there was some sort of dispute between the father and daughter. She probably just ran away because she wanted to be away from her father. But you do a little more digging, and you find that the people in this village privately worship Skane. Again, the god of seething, right? And as you investigate that cult of Skane, you wind up finding the girl. Only she wasn't kidnapped. She's willingly with that cult. And it's explained to you that she's not that lord's daughter, but rather his niece. So her parents died when she was young, and of course, without parents, she's going to be adopted. She gets adopted by that lord. Now, that lord's wife was unable to give him a living heir because of this situation with the plague or with the Hollowborn crisis, where children were being born and then passing away. So he doesn't have an heir, and his wife has been unable to give him a living heir. So what he did was he waited for his niece, who he's adopted, to come of age. And again, she's wholly financially reliant on him because she's a minor. And uses her to give him a child. So essentially, he raped his niece. And what he's doing in this trip is his niece, who is pregnant with his daughter, or son, so his child, he doesn't want her to give birth in this region where most of the children are not surviving childbirth or early childhood. Because he doesn't have a living heir, because his wife couldn't supply him with one. So he's taking his daughter out of sight, essentially, and the baby out of sight, and taking them away from this place where the crisis is happening with miscarriages and the death of young children, so that he can have an heir. But, of course, he's essentially raped his niece. So the niece, you'll understand now why she's willingly going along with this group of people that worship Skane, because she's trapped, right? Her financial support comes from the person that is sexually abusing her. She has no resources outside of him. And she's pregnant with his child too. So she's seething or feeling trapped, and she's kind of powerless to get any sort of revenge. So while in the village, they observed that she was, angry with her supposed father, actually uncle, and kind of manipulated her in a sense, but she's a minor, so yeah, they manipulate her and convince her to submit to a ritual, much like we heard in that journal, where she's going to become the agent of the destruction of the person that she's seething about. So you come in right after the ritual where they've sacrificed some people, and they're sending the young girl back to her uncle because she's possessed, right? And she's going to poison him, and she's going to poison the extended family, and she's basically going to wipe out the whole family. She's going to go above and beyond wiping out his entire family name, which is sort of like an extreme, over-the-top justice that still fits the crime in a sense, because why did the Lord trap her and sexually abuse her? Because he wanted an heir. He wanted to continue his family name, and he couldn't do so because of this crisis with children. So you come in right after the ritual's done, and the girl tries to go back to the uncle. And what do? Do you let her go back? Because if she goes back, obviously the uncle's not going to punish her, right? The uncle's just going to defend her at all costs and not listen to you. You can tell him, oh yeah, here's your daughter, I brought her back, but she's now possessed, and she's going to try and kill you. He's not going to listen to you. So you kind of have a couple of options. the two options that I had on my plate were basically A, let her go back to her uncle and say, hey, look, I found your daughter, or B, kill her and then tell the uncle what happened and tell the uncle you know what he did, and either punish the uncle or let the uncle go, I guess. Um, and it's not an obvious answer to me. Now, there's no the immediate answer, I guess, modern day would be to alert the authorities and say, look, here's a minor who was being sexually abused by her uncle, but also they just committed a religious sacrifice here, so arrest all of them and charge them with the various crimes. But that sort of institution doesn't exist in colonial era Pacific Northwest. So you kind of have to take it into your own hands. So what
Your original interest, like making money and then also ingratiating yourself sort of with this powerful. Well, if that person is no longer going to be in the scenario where I guess he dies or something, he's no longer a powerful person to be associated with.
Yeah, I mean yeah, you're right. As from your interest, you want some money and you wanted to be ingratiated with that nobleman, right, the uncle, which you could achieve by just letting the daughter go back to him and saying, "I found your daughter. Give me a reward," and just not mentioning the fact that it's his niece. He sexually abused her, and she's going to kill him by poisoning his food. You could do that. Obviously, yeah, you're right. You wouldn't have a friend in high places anymore because he's going to be dead, and his extended family is going to be dead because you're going to poison all them too. But you could do that. You get the money at least. What I did was I don't know if it was the right answer. I killed the girl. So I killed the girl and all the people involved in the religious sacrifice because I just thought, what's the value here of what any of these people have done? I mean, there's no value in indulging in seething, and all these people do is they identify someone like this girl who's a minor, and then get them, like, convince them to indulge in what makes them angry and what they feel upset about, whether rightfully or not, and then just take the nuclear option of punishing whoever did that to them in an extreme fashion. And she's already carried out the ritual and everything. So from the perspective of the setting, you have to believe that, this god is real and what has happened is real. So it's done. She's going to go poison him. So and that if you let her go back, the uncle will not punish her because she's carrying his heir, right? I mean, would one of us punish a relative who someone else says, oh, they committed a ritual and want to hurt you? No, I mean, obviously not. So so I just took matters in my own hand and just basically wiped out that little cult and the girl, and then I came back and I said to the uncle, one, your daughter conspired to do this and was involved in human sacrifice and is passed away now, but two, I know what you did. And actually in the game, this is the other difficult question, because it's like, what do you do with the uncle? Because the daughter's dead now, right? So it's not like he's going to continue abusing her. But, and you can kind of see his excuse. It doesn't justify what he did, but but there's no justice system in this small village, and you're new to the setting. You don't really have any authority, so no one's going to arrest him or punish him if you don't. So what do you really do? Actually, what the characters in the game say is, because you have people traveling with you, right? They say, hey, let's round up some people and lynch him. Lynch mobs are great. We'll lynch him. And it's like they all start talking about the benefits of lynch mobs. And that's one angle. At least in that angle, there is some legitimacy in the sense that it's not just you committing an extrajudicial killing on a guy that's not threatening you, and he's a nobleman who's just on a vacation.
Using the young girl as an agent, like sort of cowardly and dishonorably, like going about it.
Yeah. He's done a crime, yeah, but at least with a lynch mob, it's not like you're just one person doing an extrajudicial killing. But the problem is the game doesn't actually let you, as far as I could tell, it wouldn't let you round up a lynch mob. And actually, the village itself, where you're traveling, they're the ones that worship Skane, right? So, so are they even going to want to lynch the guy? Maybe, but not for the reasons you want to lynch him. So
But then if that guy provides them with seething and extra seething, shouldn't they be happy?
well, he's not.
That's a little facetious. That's a little
Yeah,
facetious.
yeah. Well, he's not really making them seethe though. He was making his daughter seethe.
Okay, I just like.
But you're right. You're right. I
I'm
mean,
just trying to figure out. I'm trying to figure out the point of their religion there, but I mean, it's like I worship despair.
well, they worship the punishment of people that cause others to seethe, right? That oppress or hold people down, and those people being powerless to get back at the master, right?
It just seems like their priority would be like fixing the problem with their children. You know,
Yeah, that would be
which
a
shows
nice.
that gotta
Yeah,
be selfish too. That's an element.
yeah,
I
that,
care about my kid.
yeah. That would be, yeah, wanting to solve the problem, right? But their if we're just talking about their religion, and again, I don't like or defend what this religion is presented as, but their perspective seems to be almost like a partisanship for the underclass, like and so in killing the nobleman or in killing the person that abused the child and uses his money to get away with it and to travel to another place to have the child away from the disease, having all that privilege and wealth, he's like a class enemy to them, right? He's not powerless. He's not being held down or abused in any way. Whereas they seem to identify themselves with people who are powerless or held down. And so that seems to be their interest. It seems to be in punishing or just, again, it's a god of seething. So they all have a sort of a seething against people who are successful. So of course they want that daughter to go back and poison him and poison all his friends and family because they have a seething against that upper class, a seething against the successful people, and they just indulge it. So anyway, I went back to the guy and I said, know what you did, and he just gives you some money and says, I have no idea what you're talking about. Thanks for figuring out what happened to my daughter. Here's some money. See you later. And it's a computer game. I probably should have just killed him, but I was like, whatever. I'm in a village. I don't know any of these people. It's just a mess. And the game was not quite as responsive as I wanted it to be, or have as much options as I wanted it to be. But yeah, I think it was an interesting moral scenario put forward. The guy should have been punished in some way. I don't know if they wrote enough content for it to be punished, but that's the sort of scenarios and moral questions that come up in relationship to Skane, where you have someone who was genuinely abused and genuinely powerless to get back at the person who abused her, but the nature of that cult or that god being the embodiment of seething is there's really no limit on it, like you were saying, Beam. So it just gets out of hand, and so I just had no time for them. I just wiped them all out. But maybe other people would have thought differently. Actually, the game does give you an option to approve of it and to let the girl go back and carry out the revenge. And actually, you can volunteer one of your own friends to be a sacrifice for the ritual, which is kind of odd.
Oh, that's interesting options.
Yeah, it's like if you don't like one of your people, one of your companions, you can offer them up for sacrifice. Not something I did, but But I don't know if there's any really perfect answer here. I mean, the ritual is already complete as well by the time you get there. When I say you can sacrifice your friend, you can just sacrifice them generally to Skane as part of another ritual. But but you're kind of too late to really stop the ritual going forward in her case. And if you let her go, she's going to do these terrible things. And the only way to really stop her from doing those sorts of things is to somehow kill or banish her. So it's like the person who suffered the most, the underage girl, is the one you most immediately have to punish yourself, right? Because she is the immediate danger to everyone.
Yeah, so she's the victim twice, right? Like in a type of view.
Yeah, she's a victim twice, exactly. And you can either let her get her revenge and create more victims in a sense, because she's not just going to kill her uncle, or you punish the victim twice. So it's kind of like a shitty scenario. There is a way to solve it, apparently, where you can, reverse the ritual or something. I didn't go down that track. I didn't know how to do that. So if someone does play this, apparently there is another way to do it if you go above and beyond. And I guess, talk to more people and read more. I didn't do that, but apparently there's a way out of it. But at the end of the day, I didn't live in that village either, right? So I just take the money, killed the daughter, left. Um, maybe a little dishonorable. Maybe I should have done something else, but that's how I played that one out. What do we got? We still got a few more minutes. I got to go soon, but the let's wrap the space up with the last one. You see, at the end there, there's let's see what it is. It's the first tweet actually, and it's about Ondra. So you'll see Ondra is in that first picture there. It's basically the head of an anglerfish, and then a vaguely female body. Well, not vaguely female. It's a female body, but it's not human. The and then we got a text from her. I don't know if I have time to read through the whole thing. I'll summarize it. And then we have, again, another scenario that you're faced with that I felt was very interesting, and did pose, again, a sort of a moral challenge that you have to make a decision, and it causes you to think, essentially, which, again, is really the beauty of this art form, that it can put you in a scenario or a setting. It can present you with a choice that is actually significant and requires some thought. And then when you give it the thought, there are multiple ways to act, and it will have some impact and some reaction from the game. So it is sort of like a moral exercise. But anyway, you can see the god there. It's a head of an anglerfish, vaguely female body, or a female body that's not a human. It's a goddess of the sea. But also of things that are forgotten or lost, and just a loss and mourning in general. Also moons and the ocean tide. So the portrayal makes sense, the head of an anglerfish. And she's sort of a grand motherly figure as well. It is female. It has a woman's voice. So the female torso makes sense. And it's kind of... So this goddess, Ondra, she comes in at the best written, most well-produced part of this game. Essentially, they released an expansion pack, and sometime later after the game was released. And her story is what's presented in it. And they did a very good job presenting her story and just developing who she is as a character. So it's really the height of the game. If Skane was about seething, Ondra, again, the goddess's name is Ondra, is about being freed from some past event or experience that upsets or torments you, right? And ultimately to be free of all memories in general. So with that daughter who was abused by her uncle, one way is the seething way and the nuclear option of committing some unspeakable ritual and basically killing your uncle. But another one is... this path that Ondra is going to present, which is being able to forget or let go of memories that are continuing to upset you. Now, it's a debate as to whether it's a good thing to let go of memories, but for this goddess, she represents that desire to forget or to be free of the past. And I mentioned, for example, that you can ask her what you should do with the souls that were siphoned off by Wodika. When Wodika wanted to be, the head of the gods, and she says she's one of the gods who says, just disperse them into the void, because they'll be like sleeping babies rocked back and forth in the waves of eternity with no memory, no identity, no worries, and that's really what her idea of bliss is, just to be like a piece of debris on the water floating back and forth and not being troubled by any sad memories or anything like that. So, Ondra, again, god of forgetfulness, wanting to let go of the past. As I mentioned earlier, she has a sort of a romance that's developed. And so her lover is Abaddon, who's sort of a pseudo-Hephaestus or Prometheus. He's like the god of the forge, so Hephaestus, obviously. But also the god of wanting to leave a legacy and to be remembered. So the romance between Ondra and Abaddon is, she had the desire for God's secrets to be forgotten, But Abaddon he represented the desire for our legacy to live on. And their dispute essentially leads to the material death of Abaddon, um, just because he wasn't willing to let her go forward and wipe out the past. So it's an interesting story, and just two people who are incompatible at a fundamental level, but still somehow come together. I won't go too far into that romance plotline now, but again, it's actually the best written part of the game. So if anyone does play this game, I would say skip to part 2 of the White March as quickly as you can, because it's about Andra and it is the best written part of the game, and does develop a lot of interesting themes that, again, just like the theme of seething and wanting to get revenge on someone even at the cost of your own life, like that quote from Heraclitus, here is a theme of how the past can trouble you and how to move on from the past. So, I read that journal article from Skane, or the farmer who was sacrificing himself because he wanted revenge on his landlord. I'm not going to read the section from Andra because I don't have time. I got to go in a bit. But essentially, what if you do read it, I'll summarize it for you. Essentially, Andra has a priesthood, right? She doesn't have to hide herself like Skane. She's not like banned by the upper class or something. She's just a god who has people that worship her. She has churches. And essentially they have a class of people that are priests, and some of them are called gift bearers. And one of the rituals that this church does is very similar to confession. So essentially someone will come to the church, maybe for example, someone has lost a child, right? Because that's what's happening in the world at this time. And maybe they have a locket with a portrait of their newborn who died maybe a year later or a couple of years later, and they don't let go of the locket. It just stays with them. They can never forget what happened, and it's impacting their ability to live their life. Right? They've had this loss, and it continues to haunt them. And of course, in this setting, they're continuing to be haunted about whether they can have another child or whether it's just going to be another child loss. So they will go to the church. They'll talk with the priest, and the priest of Andra will listen to them about what troubled them in the past, console them, and what they do in terms of a ritual is they say, give us something that is representing that memory from the past that's holding you back or is weighing you down. And so, give us the locket. And so they will give up the locket, and as part of the therapy. And then that locket will be taken by a class of priest called a gift bearer, who will then travel to the ocean or to some deep lake or something like that, and throw it into the water. Again, Andra being the god of the sea as well. So basically consigning it to Andra, and it's irretrievable, it's gone forever, it's forgotten. And in this setting, again, the gods being real and souls being real, the god does actually help the person forget. So that's how that religion functions. Again, a lot of questions about whether it's good to forget or not. But that text there is essentially a gift bearer saying, I'm walking along the track, I see a person crying, I said, what's wrong? And the guy said, my wife wrote me a letter, she said, I'm leaving you for another man, goodbye. And so the gift bearer says, give me the letter, I'll take on that burden, and you can just forget about her and move on. So the man gives her the letter, and then moves on, and he's happy again. And the gift bearer walks further down the road, and she meets a lady who's got like a bracelet with beads on it, right? Like a praying beads. And she talks to the lady with the praying beads and says, what's wrong? Why are you sitting here looking sad and counting the beads? And the lady said, well, these are the beads on my bracelet that I made for my daughter. And there's one bead for how long she lived. She died, and she was robbed of her chance to be a mother like I am. And I was robbed of my chance to be a mother and a grandmother because she died before I did, and she didn't have children. And so the gift bearer says, that's okay, give me the bracelet, I'll take it on. And, if you give me the bracelet, then your daughter can move on to her next life, and she won't be remembered by you in this way that's sad. And so, things will smooth out, and your daughter will go to her next life, and it'll be okay. So the lady says, okay, gives her the bracelet, and again, I'm not reading the text, but essentially the grandmother or the mother goes off and is happy. And so the gift bearer then comes up to the sea where she was traveling. She throws all the items into the sea, but then she's sad. And, she's like, Andra, I gave up all the stories. The man whose wife left him, the woman whose daughter passed away. I gave up their items and they are forgotten. But I still remember the stories. And I don't have any items that remind me of them. And actually, they weren't my stories to begin with, so they're not really mine to forget. So then, Andra or the sea or whatever, essentially, she looks at the sea and eventually realizes that she can give herself, like a priest or a nun or something. So, she dedicates herself to Andra or whatever. And she's taken away by the sea, and that's the end of her life. And that's how she gives up her burden. But what's interesting about the text, and again, I think these games are a great art form. I think they're great literature. Not always, but I think what is interesting from our perspective today, in this short story that I screenshotted there, is that often we have people working in services where they do take on other people's problems. Right? There's plenty of psychiatrists. There's a policeman. There's a prosecutors, defense attorneys. There's many people that spend all day handling the tragic stories of others and either helping them move on or trying to resolve it in a just fashion. And so, of course, those people always get their emails at work, whatever, saying, here's like a wellness weekday or whatever, and how are you doing? But that is kind of a question of how these people deal with the subject matter of what they work with. And so I think that text there is sort of touching on that too, and saying, how does this priesthood that listens to people's, not confessions about something they did wrong, but confessions about what upsets them, how does this priesthood who listens to that and consoles those people and then discards their belongings deal with their own suffering? So that is the purpose of that text. And you can actually debate the topic with Andra. Funnily enough, you can directly talk to the goddess at one point. And one of the things that comes up as well is it good to forget? I mean, should a drug addict, for example, forget his past drug use? Because if he does, maybe he just won't think about drugs anymore, and then maybe he falls into that same old addiction again. Rather than be aware of it and it being a struggle, but at least he has his guard up and he knows about it and he hasn't forgotten it and he doesn't go back to it. But maybe having that struggle there will eventually wear them down. I don't know. Similarly, if you give up all your memories, are you still you? Like, how much can you afford to give up or move on from before you become someone else? Or is it good to mature? And maybe there's something dishonorable as well in the process of forgetting to escape a problem. If we wanted to keep it in this sort of, not gaming, but sort of a martial or sort of warrior cult sort of thing, it's, what about like a retainer, like some samurai whose lord dies, and now they wander around. What do? They just forget their lord? I mean, Andra would probably say yes. The memory of your lord is causing you to wander around and seek vengeance or not know what to do with yourself. But if you forgot, maybe you would start over anew and have a life that's unburdened by that. But some people would perhaps call that sort of disloyal or dishonorable almost. But at any rate, these are a lot of the questions that come up in regards to Andra, and this is really the best written part of the game, and they do handle it quite well. I'm not picking the ultimate question out here, which is the very ending of this section of the game, where that romance between the goddess of forgetfulness and the god of wanting to remember and have a legacy is revisited. But in any event, I'll present a scenario, because I have a scenario that is interesting and again is a moral question that you have to weigh in on. Essentially, you are, at this point in the game, you're sent up to what's a place called the Abbey of the Fallen Moon. It's high up in the mountains, and when you arrive there, you are right at the changing of the guard, so to speak. The abbey is headed by a high abbot. He's waiting for his successor to arrive. And for all they know, that's who you are. And the abbey has two main floors. It has like a ground floor where business is done, and it has a lower floor where an older generation of monks, they live there and they're locked in a sort of underground prison. And they just kind of, like a very aesthetic monk. They're sort of praying to Andra, and they're trying to forget all their life because, that's the principle of the goddess, right? To forget everything. So they're trying to forget their lives and then pass on to the other side. Now, when you show up, you can pretend to be the successor to the High Abbot. So you can pretend to be that next generation of leadership and to take over the abbey and to bring in the new generation of monks. Which makes sense to do because you need to know what business has been going on at the abbey. For reasons I won't get into, but basically you need to know what they've been doing at this abbey. And what better way than pretend to be the successor, who is called the Tide Bringer. And so I did that. I didn't explore the other options of not doing that. I just decided, you know what? I know enough about the setting. I read the books and stuff. I'm just going to pretend to be the priest who's taking over the abbey. So I show up and, talk to the High Abbot. And he says, that's great. Glad you're here to be my successor. We have to do a ritual. And then we'll do our changing of the guard and you can take over. Congrats. Have a nice day. So I go to the library. I looked at a memorial as well and figured out how to do the ritual. And then it turns out that the ritual involves going down to that second floor, retrieving a ritual object from the older generation of monks down there, securely locking them in there, in that second floor underground, and flooding the place. So essentially drowning them. And then when the water recedes, so you've drowned them all, the generation upstairs, the current generation, they then become the older generation and they go downstairs to do their praying and forgetting their life and then passing on to the other side. They will be the people who live down below, and you'll be the new generation on that first floor conducting the business until, of course, you have a successor. So that's essentially how the abbey works. It's like the old generation is down below, very old, doing their praying, just waiting to be drowned. The generation upstairs is conducting the business until the next High Abbot is elected and arrives, and then they'll go downstairs. So that's the cycle of leadership at this abbey. So basically, I decide, I'm pretending to be the leader, may as well carry through, right? And so I go down there to get the ritual object, and you can see the older generation is sort of divided. Some of them were successful in forgetting, they're just kind of sitting around, they don't remember anything. Others are somewhat kind of angry and confused, they just attack you. And others want to be released. They're like, hey, I've forgotten some of my past life, but I also forgot my conviction and my faith. Let me out. Don't flood the place. Let me out, because I want to go make some new memories. I have no idea why I decided to come to this temple and work as a priest. I forgot all that. I don't know why I thought it would be a good idea to lock myself down here, and I definitely don't think it's a good idea anymore to be drowned down here. So don't do it. Don't lock me in here. Don't kill me. But one of your companions is actually a follower of Andra, and she says, essentially, when these people were in their right mind, like before they had been locked down on the second floor for a while and forgetting their memories and some of them losing their mind, before all that happened, they made the conscious and purposeful decision to be locked down there and to undergo this ritual and be drowned. So do it. Honor their wishes that they had when they were in their, best mind. And the other question is, of course, this is high up in the mountains. It's snowing everywhere. They're all old. If I let them out, like, not only am I going to piss off everyone in the temple and get myself in trouble, but where are they even going to go? Like, I'm not going to. I don't have the capacity to feed them all and to lead them all down and settle a new. I mean, it's ridiculous. They're just going to freeze to death in the mountain range. Uh, so for me, I just did as ritual dictated. I got the object. I avoided the aggressive, crazy ones and ignored the others. Locked the place up, and I just opened the water valve and drowned them all. Was that the right move? I don't know. I mean, we know from the setting that the souls do go to the other side and have then returned. We do know that these people, at some point, wanted this done to them. And also, I have things that I need to do, right? I'm on a mission here. So, so I just drowned them. But again, it's a very interesting moral question that gets put forward. And I did think about it, I did actually consider, should I or should I not drown these people? But even if you didn't drown them, not only the problems I just mentioned, but it's not like all of them want out. Only some of them want out. Some of them have lost their mind. They're just kind of lazing around. And, if I start letting some of them out, is the ritual going to be stopped halfway by the other people in the church who sees me letting them out? And then I ruin the whole ritual for those people that successfully forgot and for the people that have lost their mind and are just like kind of crazy in their little cells. I mean, I'm pretty sure, given the setting and the way that souls are handled, that it is actually probably the best thing to do to drown them. Certainly for your mission, it's the best thing. But again, it's just a very interesting scenario that's put forward. It's put forward very well. And it's put forward in a setting that really has a lot of material there flashing it out. Like that book I put the screenshot of the gift bearer collecting the goods and then discarding them for the people, but then realizing that she's taken on burdens herself. So, I think it was I think the game is full of those little scenarios. And I think it's a very rich setting. And again, one of the highest art forms in my opinion, because you have beautiful visuals, you have beautiful music, you have well written, well, within reason, not all the writing is that great, but professionally written and certainly well fleshed out setting that raises questions that we discuss ourselves in any sort of philosophical discussion. Like what did I say earlier? Like a discussion of, is it right to forget everything? Like, is there something you lose if you do so? Do people in professions where they take on other people's problems face such problems themselves? And what do they do about that? Because you can't just listen to everyone else's problems and not have it affect you. So I wanted to present those two scenarios, present you Pillars of Eternity. I think it's a flawed jam. Like I said, I don't really recommend playing Pillars of Eternity. At least not as your first attempt into this sort of art form or genre. But I will say White March Part 2 is extremely well written and well done. It's sort of the high point of the game. So if you do play it, beeline for that part. And the sequel is very, very good too. So I would highly recommend playing the sequel. Maybe as the first game. I enjoyed the sequel greatly. Maybe as your first game as well, try that. Especially now that you've heard the setting. If you do like the setting, the sequel is the same world, but it's on it's in the Caribbean or West Indies. It's in like the islands across from the East Coast. So it's a different location geographically, but same setting, same world, same everything. And with that, I'm going to leave it there. I'm not going to take any comments or anything like that. I'm running right up on a time when I have to leave. So thank you, and I guess I'll talk to you guys later. Bye.